What you're about to hear isn't the sanitized version of jungle warfare found in textbooks or official after-action reports. According to declassified military records and first-hand sniper testimonies, some of the deadliest threats faced by American marksmen in Southeast Asia never fired a shot, never wore a uniform, and never appeared on a map. They crawled. They flew. They waited. In the suffocating jungles of the region, where humidity wrapped around the body like a second skin and visibility collapsed to a few meters, the sniper's greatest strength, absolute stillness, became a vulnerability. Remaining motionless for hours was essential for survival. But that same immobility turned the human body into fertile ground for the jungle's smallest predators. Pay close attention to this part of the story, because this is the side of war few veterans spoke about openly, not out of shame, but because words often failed to capture it. Military doctrine trains snipers to control breathing, suppress muscle spasms, and endure pain without movement. What it didn't prepare them for was the psychological warfare waged by insects that attacked silently, relentlessly, and without warning. Insects that carried disease. Insects that swarmed. Insects that could betray a perfectly concealed position with a single, uncontrolled reaction. Veterans described the jungle as alive, not metaphorically, but tactically. The ground pulsed. The air vibrated. Leaves whispered not just with wind, but with movement. Every inch of exposed skin was a target. Every breath risked inhaling something that bit, stung, or burrowed. At first, the insects were dismissed as a nuisance. An irritation. A tropical inconvenience. That illusion didn't last long. Snipers soon realized that the insects of Southeast Asia were not passive elements of the environment. They were active participants in the battlefield. Some transmitted diseases that weakened soldiers over weeks, destroying endurance and focus. Others attacked in sudden waves, forcing men to choose between unbearable pain and instant exposure. And some, drawn to sweat, heat, or even the metallic scent of weapons, gathered in ways that could compromise an entire mission. One veteran recalled lying prone for nearly 12 hours, rainwater pooling beneath his chest, ants crawling into his sleeves and down his spine. He didn't move. He couldn't. The mission demanded silence. The enemy patrol was less than 50 meters away. Any motion, even a reflexive twitch, would mean death. Another sniper spoke of mosquitoes so dense they formed a visible cloud, their constant whining drilling into his skull. He counted bites not by tens, but by hundreds. Fever followed days later. Weakness. Hallucinations. Yet the mission logs simply recorded illness, as if the jungle itself hadn't launched the attack. This was the reality of silent operations in the jungle. No explosions. No gunfire. Just pressure. Heat. Pain. And the slow erosion of concentration. The fear didn't come only from being discovered by the enemy. It came from knowing that your own body could betray you. A sneeze. A flinch. A slap at your neck. Any one of them could end everything. And as the war dragged on, these insects ceased to be background noise. They became a strategic factor. Commanders began to acknowledge them indirectly through changes in patrol duration, rotation schedules, and medical evacuation statistics that didn't align with combat reports. The jungle was fighting back. And for the men trained to be invisible, it was a nightmare you couldn't wake from. In the next part, we'll begin the list the most feared, most disruptive, and most psychologically devastating insects encountered by American snipers, starting with the ones that attacked in absolute silence and left lasting damage long after the mission ended. Military manuals described mosquitoes as a hygiene problem. Veterans knew better. In the jungles of Southeast Asia, mosquitoes were not an annoyance, they were a slow, methodical weapon. Silent. Persistent. And far more patient than any human enemy. For snipers operating alone or in two-man teams, they were often the first true test of psychological endurance. The danger wasn't just the bite. It was what followed. Mosquitoes carried malaria, dengue fever, and a range of parasitic infections that didn't kill quickly. They weakened. They confused. They hollowed a man out from the inside while he was still expected to perform at peak precision. A sniper with a fever didn't just suffer physically, his depth perception faltered, his breathing rhythm changed, and his decision-making slowed. That delay could be fatal. Observation missions routinely lasted 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours. Snipers lay motionless in mud, in water, beneath rotting foliage. Sweat pooled in their uniforms, creating the perfect attractant. The mosquitoes came in waves, sensing heat and carbon dioxide. They crawled into ears, nostrils, eyelids. Bites layered over bites until skin lost sensation entirely. You couldn't swat them. You couldn't scratch. You couldn't even tense a muscle. Veterans described the sensation as being eaten alive in slow motion. One recalled counting his breaths to avoid reacting as mosquitoes bit his lips and eyelids. Another said the worst part wasn't the pain, it was the sound. That faint, high-pitched whine, hovering just beyond reach, drilling into the mind hour after hour. Eventually, the body fought back. Fever set in. Chills followed in tropical heat. Hallucinations weren't uncommon. Shapes moved that weren't there. Shadows seemed to breathe. And through it all, the sniper had to remain perfectly still, perfectly focused, perfectly lethal. Medical evacuations due to mosquito-borne illness quietly increased as the war progressed. Yet many cases never made it to official statistics. Snipers often pushed through symptoms, unwilling to abandon positions or expose teammates. Missions continued with men operating at a fraction of their capacity, relying on muscle memory instead of clarity. The psychological impact lingered. Even after returning from the field, some veterans reported phantom sensations, the feeling of insects crawling across skin that was clean and dry. Sleep became fragmented. Stillness triggered anxiety. The very discipline that once kept them alive now summoned memories of helplessness. And mosquitoes were only the beginning. If mosquitoes drained strength slowly, the next threat attacked all at once, with numbers so overwhelming that even the most disciplined snipers struggled to maintain control. In the next part, we move to the insects that swarmed, burned, and forced impossible choices between exposure and agony. Mosquitoes tested patience. Ants destroyed it. In the dense jungle floor of Southeast Asia, entire ecosystems thrived just beneath the leaf litter. To a sniper lying motionless for hours, the ground itself became hostile territory. Ants, aggressive, territorial, and merciless, moved with purpose, not randomness. When they found a heat source, they committed fully. And a human body was the warmest thing in the jungle. Fire ants, army ants, and other biting species traveled in columns that stretched for meters. When a prone sniper unknowingly lay across one of those trails, the response was immediate. Thousands of insects surged at once, climbing boots, legs, torsos, faces. Their bites weren't just painful, they burned, injected venom, and triggered violent reflexes the body struggled to suppress. This is where discipline met biology. Veterans described feeling the first bite like a spark, the second like a needle, the 10th like fire spreading under the skin. Within seconds, it became unbearable. Muscles locked. Teeth clenched. Vision narrowed. And yet, movement was still not an option. One sniper recalled ants crawling into his mouth and biting his gums as he kept his jaw sealed to avoid screaming. Another spoke of ants entering his ear canal, biting until blood trickled out, all while an enemy patrol passed within eyesight. He didn't move. He nearly lost consciousness. The danger wasn't just exposure. It was betrayal. A sudden thrash, a shouted curse, even a sharp intake of breath could reveal a perfectly concealed position. Entire operations were compromised when swarms forced involuntary reactions. Ants didn't just cause pain, they made silence impossible. Medical consequences followed quickly. Infected bites swelled, hardened, and sometimes turned septic in the human environment. Snipers continued missions with legs so inflamed they could barely crawl afterward. Sleep deprivation compounded the damage. Pain lingered for days, sometimes weeks. But the deeper wound was psychological. The jungle stopped feeling neutral. The ground was no longer stable. Every patch of earth became suspect. Veterans later described an inability to lie still even years after returning home. Stillness no longer meant safety, it meant vulnerability. This is when many snipers began to understand a brutal truth: the environment itself was adapting faster than they were. The jungle didn't need bullets. It had numbers. And if ants attacked in overwhelming force, the next threat operated differently: slow, invasive, and terrifying in its intimacy. In the next part, we examine the insects that burrowed into flesh, infested wounds, and turned minor injuries into silent killers. Some threats didn't announce themselves with pain. They waited. In the shadowed undergrowth of Southeast Asia, where moisture never evaporated and wounds never truly dried, certain insects adopted a far more intimate method of attack. They didn't swarm. They didn't sting. They infiltrated. Leeches were the first to be noticed, not by sensation, but by absence. Snipers would finish an observation mission and discover blood-soaked socks, boots heavy with water, and something else. Leeches attached silently, releasing anticoagulants that kept blood flowing long after they detached. A man could lose significant blood without realizing it, weakening him before the next mission even began. But leeches were only the surface-level invaders. More disturbing were insects that turned the human body into a host. Botflies and similar parasites laid eggs in damp clothing or open skin. Days later, larvae burrowed into flesh, feeding slowly, causing swelling, infection, and relentless discomfort. In the jungle, proper extraction was rarely immediate. Missions continued. The infestation grew. Veterans described the sensation as something moving beneath the skin, not imagined, but real. A constant pressure. A reminder that the body was no longer fully under its owner's control. Snipers trained to dominate their environment now felt occupied from the inside. Minor cuts became gateways. A scratch from thorny vegetation, a mosquito bite scratched too hard in the jungle, these were invitations. Maggots-infested wounds left untreated for hours. Infection spread fast in the heat. Fever followed. And yet, extraction wasn't always an option. Evacuation meant exposure. Exposure meant death for others. So men endured. Field medics documented cases where soldiers completed missions with larvae embedded in their legs, backs, even scalps. The physical pain was manageable. The mental strain was not. Knowing something was feeding on you, growing, while you lay still, waiting for the enemy, broke something fundamental. Sleep deprivation worsened the hallucinations. Veterans spoke of feeling crawling sensations long after returning home, years after the war ended. Doctors found no cause. The body remembered even when the mind tried to forget. These insects didn't just weaken snipers physically. They altered behavior. Movement patterns changed. Positions were avoided not because of enemy presence, but because the ground itself was suspected. The jungle dictated tactics now. And just when soldiers thought they understood the threats around them, the final enemy emerged, one that didn't attack the body directly, but shattered concentration in the most dangerous way possible. In the final part, we confront the insects that exposed snipers, collapsed missions, and turned nature into an active informant of war. The final threat didn't bite. It didn't burrow. It didn't carry disease. It exposed you. In the later years of the war, American snipers began reporting something deeply unsettling: insects that didn't just coexist with the battlefield, but actively compromised it. Certain species, cicadas, beetles, flies, reacted violently to disturbance. When a concealed sniper shifted even slightly, the jungle responded. A sudden burst of wings. An unnatural silence. Or worse, a localized swarm. Enemy forces learned to read these signs. A cloud of insects lifting from a patch of foliage meant something had moved. A sudden change in jungle noise suggested a foreign presence. Nature itself became an alarm system, one that no amount of camouflage could silence. Veterans described moments where they knew they were perfectly hidden, only to watch insects betray them. A beetle striking a scope lens. A fly repeatedly landing on exposed skin, forcing micro-movements. Cicadas erupting into sound around a concealed position, then falling silent as a patrol approached. The psychological pressure was immense. Snipers trained to control breathing and heart rate now had to control the environment, something no training prepared them for. Every twitch risked a chain reaction. Every reaction risked discovery. Missions failed not because of poor tactics, but because the jungle reacted faster than the human nervous system. This changed everything. Observation times shortened. Height selection became less about visibility and more about insect behavior. Entire areas were avoided because the local fauna was too loud. Nature reshaped doctrine, quietly and unofficially. By the war's end, many snipers carried scars no one could see. Not from bullets, but from endurance. From hours of pain without movement. From knowing that survival sometimes depended less on marksmanship than on resisting the urge to react like a human being. For many veterans, the war didn't end overseas. The crawling sensations followed them home. The inability to stay still. The sudden spikes of anxiety in quiet rooms. The jungle never truly left. These insects were never listed as enemy combatants. They received no medals. They appear in no victory statistics. Yet they shaped decisions, broke concentration, caused evacuations, and contributed to deaths never officially classified as combat-related. This is the side of war rarely discussed, where nature becomes an adversary as lethal and relentless as any army. And it's a reminder that in war, survival isn't always about defeating the enemy in front of you. Sometimes, it's about enduring everything around you. If you value stories that respect veterans and expose the realities hidden behind official history, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for the next untold chapter of war.